Okay, so get ready because this time we're taking a deep dive into a listener-requested topic. And it's a fascinating one, a Spanish expedition to Cambodia in the late 16th century.
Yeah,
You don't often hear those two places mentioned in the same sentence, do you?
not very often.
But this story has it all. Samurai warriors, daring jungle escapes, even a gifted donkey.
It's a good one.
It really is.
It all unfolds during a pivotal time in history, the late 1500s, when Spain and Portugal, though technically united under the Iberian Union, were rivals,
Yeah.
competing for trade routes and influence in Southeast Asia.
Right. The Iberian Union now, for those of us who maybe slept through that part of history class, what exactly was that again?
Sure. So basically the king of Spain, he also became the king of Portugal, uniting the two crowns.
Okay.
But uniting the crowns didn't mean their colonial ambitions were also united.
Right.
Both nations really wanted control over the lucrative spice trade. And that, by the way, was a big deal back then.
Yeah. Spices were like the high-tech gadgets of their day, weren't they?
Exactly.
Incredibly valuable and sought after all over the globe.
Whoever controlled those trade routes
Yeah,
basically controlled a whole lot of power.
that's right.
And that brings us to the heart of Cambodia, where we meet a Portuguese adventurer by the name of Diego Veloso.
Okay.
Veloso had spent over a decade immersed in Cambodian culture and politics.
Wow.
Really knew his way around, and this gave him a unique perspective because, you see, the region was on the brink of major upheaval at the time.
And this wasn't just any unrest, right? This was the Kingdom of Siam. We know it as Thailand today. But they'd set their sights on expanding their territory, even installing a puppet ruler in Cambodia.
Exactly. They deposed the rightful king. It was a mess.
Wow.
And this is where another key player enters the scene, a Spaniard named Blas Ruiz.
Okay.
He saw an opportunity here, not just for himself, but also to potentially strengthen Spain's position in the region. Maybe even get one up on those Portuguese rivals.
Yeah, I bet.
So he, along with Veloso, decided to take a chance. They set sail for Manila to plead their case to the Spanish governor there.
So they basically said, hey, Spain, there's this whole power vacuum happening in Cambodia right now. Help us step in, restore the rightful king. And oh, by the way, you might gain a foothold in Southeast Asia while you're at it.
That was the pitch. It was a bold one.
It sure was.
The Spanish governor, he was hesitant at first, but in the end, he agreed to it.
Wow.
He greenlit an expeditionary force.
This is where I bet it gets really interesting who all was part of this alliance.
It was a mixed bag, to say the least. You had the Spanish, obviously driven by this hunger to expand their empire and, maybe stick it to the Portuguese a bit.
Right.
You had Portuguese adventurers enticed by promises of riches and relying heavily on Veloso's knowledge of the area.
So even though they were on the same side, there was potential for some conflict there.
For sure.
I can imagine.
And as if that wasn't complicated enough, you also had Ronin samurai warriors.
Wait, Ronin samurai, as in masterless samurai from Japan.
The same.
How did they end up in Southeast Asia?
Well, these Ronin, they were exiled warriors looking for a new leader, a new cause to dedicate themselves to.
Wow.
And what better way to do that than by signing up for a risky mission in a faraway land?
Talk about an unlikely crew.
You got that right.
So this alliance, Spanish, Portuguese, and Ronin samurai, they set sail for Cambodia with a common goal, but very different motivations.
Very different.
I can only imagine how that played out.
Well, let's just say it wasn't exactly smooth sailing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they ran into a bit of bad luck. Their ships were scattered by a huge storm,
Oh, no.
forced them to trek through the Cambodian jungle to get to the capital.
I can only imagine that was pretty brutal. I mean, a dense jungle, humid climate, that's not exactly a walk in the park, even for seasoned adventurers, right?
It was a true test of their endurance. And you know what else? During this whole jungle trek thing, they ran into another challenge, a cultural clash with the local Chinese community in Cambodia.
Oh, that's right. You mentioned earlier how global trade was even back then. What was the source of tension between the Spanish and the Chinese?
So the Chinese community in Cambodia, they were very integrated into society, played a vital role in commerce and trade, you see.
Right.
And the Spanish, showing up with their military ambitions and, their own sense of cultural superiority, well, it caused friction right from the start.
Yeah, it wasn't just about different customs, was it?
No, not at all. This clash, it mirrored a much bigger competition for power and influence in the region.
So the stage was set for a tense standoff. What happened when the Spanish finally reached the Cambodian capital?
Well, remember those gifts they brought for the Cambodian king?
Yeah, hoping to win him over.
Exactly. One of those gifts was a donkey.
A donkey.
Yeah, a gesture of goodwill, or so they thought. But you see, their attempt at diplomacy Completely backfired. Tensions were already high with the Chinese community, and then this confrontation happened where the Spaniards ended up killing a bunch of Chinese merchants.
Oh, wow. Talk about a miscalculation. They went there to restore order, and instead they ignited more conflict.
That's one way to put it.
How did the Cambodian king react to all of this?
He was furious.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. I mean, the Chinese community was vital to Cambodia's economy, and this act of aggression, it threatened to destroy the balance of power. The king was already wary of these newcomers, and now he saw them as a direct threat.
It sounds like things just went from bad to worse.
You could say that.
And then, to make matters even more tense, they decided to pay the king a little visit at his royal palace.
Yeah, about that in hindsight, not the best move.
Yeah. I can't imagine the king saw a heavily armed entourage showing up at his doorstep as just a friendly visit.
Not quite the message they were going for.
So what happened when these two forces collided at the palace?
According to chroniclers, it was complete chaos. The king was already enraged about the deaths of the Chinese merchants, and he was afraid for his own safety.
Understandably.
So he unleashed his forces on the Spanish.
Oh, wow.
They were facing wave after wave of Cambodian soldiers fighting for their lives.
That sounds terrifying. What chance did they have? I mean, they were up against a determined defense force on their home turf.
They were completely outnumbered, that much is for sure. But the Spanish and their allies, they had some advantages on their side, their training, their discipline, and, maybe surprisingly, the element of surprise.
Surprise, how so?
The Cambodian army, they had war elephants.
War elephants.
Huge, powerful creatures that would terrify even the most experienced soldier. Imagine the ground shaking as these elephants charged into battle, their tusks. They're adorned with blades, and on their backs, platforms called howdahs filled with archers.
I can't even imagine facing down one of those charging elephants, let alone a whole army backing them up.
The Spanish had never seen anything like it. Did they stand a chance?
It was chaos everywhere. But in the middle of all that, the Spanish, even though they were outnumbered, they held their own. Their training and tactics, which had worked so well on European battlefields, they were surprisingly effective, even against war elephants. And somehow in the chaos, they even killed the Cambodian king.
They killed the king. Talk about a power move, but I can't imagine that helped their situation. No, not one bit. The king's death just made the fighting even more intense. The Spanish, they realized they were incredibly vulnerable, and they had to make a choice: stay and fight to the death, or retreat and regroup.
I bet that was a tough decision.
It was. They chose to retreat.
Wow, so they're outnumbered, surrounded, and now stuck in a hostile territory with the king's forces hunting them down. How did they escape?
They used a very specific fighting formation during their retreat called a tercio.
Oh.
Picture a tight square of soldiers' pikes sticking out like a porcupine swordsman and musketeers inside.
Oh, so the pikes kept those elephants away, and the musketeers and swordsmen could attack from within the formation.
That's it, like a moving fortress.
Very effective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The tercio formation provided incredible defense, especially out in the open. And remember, they were retreating over 30 kilometers through enemy territory.
30 kilometers? That's almost a marathon. And they're carrying weapons, trying to stay in formation, and, oh yeah, not get killed. That's incredible.
It's a testament to their training, for sure. But even with their military skills, they knew they couldn't win this fight. They needed a new plan.
So that's where Veloso and Ruiz come in, right?
Exactly. With their knowledge of Cambodian politics, they saw an opportunity. They knew that the Siamese had originally deposed the rightful heir to the throne.
Right.
They decided to find him.
That's risky.
Very risky. But they thought if they could restore the deposed king, it would completely change the game. Instead of being seen as invaders, they'd be kingmakers, pulling the strings from behind the scenes.
I like it. So while the rest of the expedition sailed back to Manila, Veloso and Ruiz set off on a new mission to the Kingdom of Laos.
Because that's where the exiled Cambodian royal family had taken refuge.
Makes sense. And is this where our four-legged friend comes back into the story?
It is. According to accounts, Veloso and Ruiz rode that donkey all the way to Laos.
No way.
Hundreds of miles over rough terrain. They say the donkey charmed the locals along the way, even got treats and flowers.
What a good donkey. What a story. So they get to Laos, find the exiled king. What happens next?
They convince the king to try and take back his throne. They promised him military support, and they used the chaos in Cambodia to their advantage. They even got some new allies along the way, a group of Malay forces who also wanted to challenge Siamese control.
So they had Spanish, Portuguese, Malay forces, and whoever else was left from the original Cambodian regime. That's a lot of different factions. How did they manage to actually put their chosen king on the throne?
Let's just say they were cunning diplomats and maybe a little bit lucky.
No.
The deposed king, with the help of this very unlikely alliance, returned to Cambodia. They fought some battles, used some smart strategies, and in the end, he was restored to the throne. He took the name King Prongkar.
Wow! So after all that, Veloso and Ruiz actually pull it off. They went from leading a desperate escape through the jungle to making a king in a foreign land. What happened to them after their victory? Did they get to enjoy it?
Well, like many stories like this, their moment of glory didn't last very long.
Oh, no.
Veloso and Ruiz were given noble titles, land positions of power in the Cambodian court. They'd gotten everything they'd ever wanted. But that's when things started to unravel.
It's lonely at the top, isn't it? Especially when you're surrounded by people who want what you have.
Exactly. Their closeness to the king, their foreign background, their growing influence, it bred resentment and jealousy. Some people in the Cambodian court started whispering about betrayal and conspiracy.
Oh, no.
And then their former Malay allies, the ones who'd helped them put the king back in power, they started to see Veloso and Ruiz as a threat.
It's like what they did to get there came back to bite them.
You could say that the Malay forces, they saw an opportunity to get rid of their rivals, so they launched a surprise attack.
The very people they had fought alongside turned on them. That's rough. What happened to Veloso and Ruiz in all of this?
Unfortunately, the details of their end are still a mystery. Some say they fought bravely but were outnumbered and killed. Others believe they might have escaped, vanished into the pages of history.
Wow. What an incredible story. Full of ambition, bravery, betrayal, just goes to show you how unpredictable history can be. It's a side of history we don't often hear about Spanish conquistadors fighting alongside samurai warriors in the jungles of Southeast Asia. A donkey carrying adventurers on this epic journey, and a daring plan to restore a king and change the balance of power in a faraway land.
And reminds us that history isn't some tidy story in a textbook. It's full of surprises, twists and turns. It's often stranger than anything we could imagine. And sometimes the best stories are the ones that have been forgotten, hidden away, just waiting to be rediscovered.
It really makes you wonder what other secrets are still out there just waiting to be uncovered. If you enjoyed this deep dive into this forgotten Spanish adventure, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and as always, keep those deep dive requests coming.